I mean, that's going to be the takeaway from this. There's so much that the finance minister needed to do, but he somehow still found money for SAA.
It did, but at what cost here? We're looking, I mean, the two startling figures that just jump out at you is, number one, 2.1 billion rand every day on debt. That's just an unsustainable figure. He mentioned that. The other thing is, I think as one of the politicians mentioned, we are really escalating into a debt crisis here. We were promised that we'd have an 87% debt ratio at 2023. It's gone higher. And at which point, I want to bring in Sifiso Skenjana there from IQ Business. Let's start, Sifiso. Thanks very much indeed for coming in with the metrics. And I'm going to bring that up in a second here. Let's look at growth. Let's look at the budget deficit and the debt to GDP ratio. Minus 7.8%, this economy is not growing, so we're not getting investment, we're not getting jobs. Our budget deficit, and that's the difference between what we collect and what we spend, that gap is now 15.7%. A couple of years ago, we were sitting at 3.4%. And then, of course, the big one, the debt ratio. Using these metrics, where are we with this health of this economy?
Devin, the challenge that we see in the context of our economy and clearly on the back of the minister's speech is we're hearing him talking about, for example, a declining multiplier on government spending, and that speaks to how for every rand that we spend, we're not getting as much GDP, and we're getting less than 1 rand of GDP for every rand we spend now. That actually speaks to the structure of the economy. It speaks to one, loss of competitiveness in our industry. It speaks to the declining tax collection base and our ability to compete in terms of from an export point of view. And also, I think there's also an interesting lens through which we can look at it is that in the context of South Africa, for every 1 rand of GDP, we're only creating 0.4 employment. And so on the other side, we're also finding that we've got lower employment multipliers for output created. What that means is that we don't have sectors that one can be employment accretive in the context of the economy. And therefore, also, when we think about growth, we are likely going to continue to see that even when growth rebounds, we're going to get jobless growth in the context of our economy based on the structural constraints that we've got in our economy in the way in which they can drive our ability to grow as an economy. If then your GDP is not going to grow, it means that your debt, your borrowing program is going to accelerate faster than your ability to grow, and therefore I think these numbers are actually scarier than what are presented, because I suspect that in the coming budget in February we're going to see a widening of that borrowing program, particularly on the back of that.
Who is the casualty of this 10.5 billion rand bailout to SAA?
It's certainly South Africans, right? We're already seeing that 21 cents to every rand that we collect in revenue is going to debt servicing. A year ago, that was about 12 cents. And so that's almost doubled over 1 year. And that means that that's cannibalizing money that's supposed to go to public programs, money that's supposed to go to service delivery, and of course, programs that are supposed to drive human capital development in the context of South Africa in terms of poverty eradication, health, education, and all of those things. And so the South African people are certainly the biggest losers in the context of the money that it continues to get poured in this bottomless pit that is South African Airways.
I just want to bring up another few key points on this budget here. So we've spoken about the 10.5 billion rand for SAA. These employment interventions, 12.6 billion rand. Of course, this relates to President Cyril Ramaphosa's recovery plan. Did you hear a lot or enough on this recovery plan in the speech?
Well, I mean, these employment interventions, I assume, are related to the 800,000 job opportunities that President Ramaphosa tabled a week ago. And when you think in context of that also, he said about 300,000 of those jobs were to help the curriculum rebound. And so it would be teaching assistants who would be getting those job opportunities, 300,000 of them. If you look at also then the skills profile of people who are unemployed in South Africa, 91% of them have a matric or less. And these are the same people who are supposed to be teaching assistants. When the curriculum does catch up, and then where will those people go back into in terms of stable and sustainable jobs? And so I think that is certainly paper fire in the context of creating sustainable jobs. But we already heard that at least the growth in capital investments is expected to be about 7.3, and that hopefully becomes one of the key triggers to be able to get more sustainable employment creation opportunities.
Yeah, and that's the key to that, Shahan. Thanks very much indeed, Sifiso Skenjana.